we had a very good reception, sir.
Oh, is that so?
Yes, we had a very nice time, and the people treated us.
Stands as a provocative figure, forever etched as the renegade in the realm of rock and roll, harboring audacious aspirations to usurp the throne from none other than the illustrious Elvis Presley, the reigning monarch of the genre. Yet, amidst his grand designs, Lewis plummeted from the zenith of acclaim into the depths of notoriety with an abruptness that stunned the world, all catalyzed by his controversial union with Myra, his 13-year-old second cousin. Embark with us on a journey as we delve into the tumultuous narrative from Myra's perspective, unraveling the intricacies of this explosive marriage. Born as Myra Gale Brown, there isn't much known about the woman who would make headlines at the age of 13. She was born into a musical family in Vicksburg, Mississippi, on July 11, 1994. Her parents were Lois and Jay Brown, a talented electric bass player. But he didn't choose to pursue music. He was known to be a family man who took pride in taking care of his wife and two children, Myra and Rusty. In 1949, the family moved to Memphis, Tennessee, when Jay took a job at Memphis Gas, Light, and Water Company. The family was getting by, but it was Brown's job that would take a toll on them. You see, back then, working standards for labor and dangerous jobs were hardly regulated. Jay, who was a lineman, would have to do very dangerous tasks in order to keep up with his job. There was no way out. One day in a tragic accident, Jay became severely injured. He had to be homebound for a year as he was rehabbed. Reports about the incident cite that Brown had nearly died while working at the power lines. The experience itself had jolted him and his family, and while he recovered, going back to his old, daunting job seemed like a terrible idea. That's when he thought of doing something daring. In his middle age, he decided to pursue music professionally. For his rescue and help, he called his cousin Jerry Lee Lewis, who was an unknown musician at the time. But Brown knew his cousin had a profound knack for belting out tunes and playing the piano. Back then, Jerry lived in Louisiana and hadn't broken into the world of music, despite his persistence. Now, Brown wasn't exactly well established either, but he knew people here and there. Plus, his talent for electric bass was only tangential. He could have worked in a band. At that time, selling the idea of powerful duos or bands to recording studios was more attractive too. It was the age of rock and roll, and whoever had the right skills to shape the genre was welcomed only if they brought something new and unique to the studios. Brown desperately needed that cutting-edge or unique selling point in his pitch to get a record deal. And if he really wanted a chance to break into the highly competitive musical industry, he needed all hands on deck. What he didn't know was that his decision would prove to be lethal for his young and shy daughter, Myra. From an early age, she was exposed to the ideals of dreaming, being passionate, and pursuing what you love. Living vicariously through her dad's musical career taught her a thing or two. She would go on to earn her fair share of notoriety in the sphere of media attention and scrutiny. But it didn't come due to her talent for writing or music. At a very fragile age, Myra was trapped in a world of heartbreak, grief, and exploitation. When Myra met Jerry, Brown was extremely enthusiastic about forming a band with his cousin Jerry. He knew that Jerry had some experience with dealing with recording studios in New Orleans, but he definitely lacked the right contacts with music moguls. That pitch was enough for Jerry to give it a shot away from home. He arrived in Memphis with a backload of dreams that were about to come true. Brown took Jerry Lee Lewis to Sun Studio to meet the musical mogul of the area at that time, Sam Phillips. It took a village and some more for Brown to convince Phillips to lend them his ear. But the mogul wouldn't budge. After all, Brown was himself a worn-out lineman who was trying to crack into the music industry with a young maestro. Even virtually, the pairing didn't seem to work. But eventually, Phillips would give them a chance through his producer and engineer, Jack Clement. The music mogul was in Florida at that time, but when he listened to Jerry's powerful vocals, he was both inspired and fascinated. For Clement, Jerry had recorded 2 songs. The first was his rendition of Ray Price's Crazy Arm, and the second was his own composition of End of the Road. Those 2 recordings were enough to earn the singer his well-deserved title of the Killer. Both Phillips and Clement thought he was born to be a star. His sudden popularity at the Sun Studio meant that Brown had earned himself some solid points. Since he was the one who brought Lewis to Memphis, he got the credit for introducing the young, misguided singer to the world of rock and roll. This is why he had opened his doors to his cousin too. In 1956, Lewis moved into a loving Brown household. The duo had to make several visits to the studio. They would come back, discuss their plans, and even jam too. Brown's wife Lois would serve them meals, and children Myra and Rusty would look at their second cousin with extreme awe and fascination. In Myra's own words, they couldn't believe they were related to someone as cool as him. and when he opened his mouth to sing or whenever he played the piano, they would find themselves being drawn to their distant cousin even more. During a very short period around December 1956, Lewis began to record as a solo artist and as a session musician for other big names that were associated with Sun Studios. In particular, he worked extensively with Carl Perkins and Johnny Cash, who described him as a king on the keys and a monarch of rock and roll whenever he held the microphone. Within only the first 2 years at Sun, Lewis had worked with Perkins on songs like Matchbox, Your True Love, and Put Your Cat Clothes On. He also worked with Billy Lee Riley on his song Flying Saucers Rock and Roll. So it wasn't surprising that in the Brown household, Lewis was regarded as the cool guy who routinely hung out with Johnny Cash and Carl Perkins. He had made a name for himself pretty quickly. When he was home, he would tell Lois, Myra, and Rusty the incredible tales of his time at the studio, and generally he seemed to get along with the kids. Initially, Myra wasn't really impressed by her second cousin. He had a terrible sense of dressing and would typically wear red plaid shirts that made him look like a country boy. Lewis also didn't have an incentive to keep up with grooming. According to Myra, he had a $1 haircut that made his ears stick out. But eventually, that repulsiveness was replaced with infatuation. Jerry would play Myra his favorite songs on the piano, had stories about Johnny Cash, and whenever Brown was busy with work, he would volunteer to take the kids out to the movies or the park. Talking about being impressed with Jerry's piano skills, Myra said, he went over to it and started playing. It was like, oh my God, Jerry was so talented and had some awesome songs. It's really special to watch him play the piano. No wonder Jerry had become an instant favorite for the kids. In fact, he was very fond of having dinners with the family. Before Myra and Rusty went to bed at night, he would have pillow fights with them. All in all, they would have a really good time together. The Brown parents were generally very happy with their house guest too. After all, his musical talents had turned Jay's life around. He was no longer required to work a dangerous job that pulled in little returns in wages. Being associated with a popular rock and roll studio was the epitome of the American dream. The Browns were nothing but grateful to the vocal rasp and profound talents of Jerry Lee Lewis. Not to mention the young singer seemed a bit different than people his age. Sure, he had his vices with women and alcohol, but generally he was fearful of the word of God. Believe it or not, the singer used to be worried about his music leading young people astray. He always came across as a God-fearing man who was also great with kids. So what could go wrong, right? Jerry's relationship with Myra. Lewis and Jay Brown could have never imagined what was happening in their household. While Jerry seemed to enjoy his free time with the kids, something forbidden and sinister was happening too. Later on, in an explosive admission, Jerry would admit that he was gradually falling in love with Myra, who was only 12 years old then. The singer always seemed to be infatuated with Myra and paid her more attention than her sibling Rusty. But no one questioned the dynamic. Myra was the eldest child and was intelligent for her age. It made sense why Jerry was spending more time with her or taking her out to the movies. During that time, the teenager Myra also felt like the luckiest girl in the world. After all, a singer on the verge of global popularity was choosing to spend his free time with her. She felt like she would have been very stupid if she didn't appreciate that. But that's about it. Her dynamic with Jerry was that of awe, a sort of fangirl and singer dynamic. She didn't ever assume it was love and attraction until Jerry began to code it in a particular way. Reminiscing about the experience, Myra has talked about how special she felt in front of the singer. But she was only a child back then, and she didn't understand the deeper implications of interacting with an adult who was interested in her romantically and possibly sexually too. By the time she was 13, Jerry had also found a profound sense of fame in the world of music. He was very close to embarking on a musical tour that was set up to rival his counterpart, Elvis Presley. Jerry wasn't there yet, but he wasn't far off either. But then he would decide to change his life and prove life-altering for a 13-year-old Myra. Before Jerry would shoot himself in the foot, he would make history though. It was December 4th, 1957, when Carl Perkins booked the studio time. As per the records, he wanted Lewis to play the piano while he jammed. At that time, Perkins released his song Blue Suede Shoes, and Brown suggested that they record a song that the band performed on the road. It was called Whole Lotta Shakin' Goin' On, released a year prior. But the Sun Studio hadn't recorded jams and stripped-down song versions, and Phillips was waiting for the studio's musical stars to gather in one place. It was sheer luck when Johnny Cash, who was riding high on the success of Folsom Prison Blues, also showed up in the studio. He wanted to see Perkins' record. It was just an added bonus that Lewis would be playing the keys. But then something unexpected happened. The King himself decided to show up at the studio too. Even though Elvis Presley wasn't associated with Sun Studios anymore, He couldn't resist the opportunity to jam with the musical giants of his time. At that time, Elvis was a chart topper with songs like Jailhouse Rock and All Shook Up, so it was easy to see that Sun Studio was about to record a historical moment. Sensing a great opportunity, Phillips made arrangements to record the four great musicians in his humble abode. He also called a local newspaper and informed them about the historical moment. In the blink of an eye, a reporter was at the Sun Studio and would later label the jam session as the $1 Million Quartet. Today, the singing session is considered to be one of the most iconic moments in modern music history. The popularity of the $1 Million Quartet was particularly explosive for Jerry Lee Lewis. While he had extensive credentials to his name, being in the company of Perkins, Cash, and Presley would put him on the map permanently. People who didn't exactly know him or hadn't interacted with his music began to listen to him. And in a short amount of time, Lewis had tapped into an entirely new audience that wasn't going anywhere. While the iconic moment seemed like a jam session for many, for the young artist it was a golden moment that sought to redefine his career. And oh boy, what a glorious flight it was. Jerry himself felt like he was on the top of the world and nothing would come in between him and his global success. But only within 8 days of his newly earned fame, Jerry would do something unthinkable. Jerry's controversial marriage with Myra. Right after his $1 Million Quartet moment, Jerry told the Brown household that he had to be in Louisiana, his hometown. The singer told the family that he was going on a work trip, and well, there was no speculation about the timing of the trip. After all, he was going home. But when the singer arrived in his home state, he was looking to cheat on the system and do something illegal. He called up a favor with an adult female friend and sought a marriage license with her. It is unclear what he told the friend in question, but somehow she was ready to have a pretend marriage with him. All we know is that the friend pretended to be Myra when she signed the marriage license. Perhaps she didn't know that she was impersonating a 13-year-old. Or maybe Jerry fed her with lies and the woman didn't know she was about to help a man do something dark, twisted, and sinister. However, Jerry was able to acquire a license. Back then, there wasn't a lot of emphasis on legal checks. The system to register a marriage was mostly manual. And not to mention the institution of marriage itself was deemed private and sacred. Sure, there was a taboo around marrying your cousin. But no state in the United States of America outlawed marriage between second cousins. No matter the legal intricacies, Jerry didn't seem to care. He had gotten away with it either way. When he returned to Memphis, he went straight to the Brown family house. Despite garnering success and monetary stability, the singer hadn't moved out from the cramped household for some reason. And now we know why. He had his eyes on the 13-year-old Myra, who was an 8th grader at the time. Chaos broke out when Jerry had dinner with the family on one unfortunate night. That's when he asked Myra if she wanted to go to the movies with him. He had spent some time in Louisiana and his musical commitments kept him busy. Jay and Lois were also present at the table when he proposed a plan to hit the theater, but the pair didn't bat an eye. It was common for Jerry and Myra to hang out after dinner, as long as the teenager was back in time to get a good night's sleep before school in the morning. Myra enthusiastically agreed. After dinner, the duo got into the car and supposedly headed for the movies. The teenager recalled the moment as something exciting and typical. There was no speculation around it. It felt like routine to her until she realized that Jerry wasn't driving to the theater at all. Instead, he just kept driving to an unknown location. And when she prompted the singer about his plans, it seemed like he was driving away from the world. After reaching an unnamed location, he did the unexpected. In Myra's words, he drove and drove and drove and drove and I didn't know where he was going. It wasn't toward the movies. He opened up the glove box and pulled out this marriage license. I looked at it and it had his and my name on it. I looked at him and said, I thought you had to stand and say something to get married. That's when Jerry clarified that it was just the marriage license and the duo would get married soon. Myra remembers being scared and confused at the moment. She knew she had a crush on Jerry, but she didn't know how to describe her feelings. When she saw the piece of paper in the singer's hand, she thought the moment was done and sealed. In her iteration of events, she had already said yes. And how do you exactly break up a marriage that didn't seek your approval at all? All she knew was that her parents would be furious and her dad might as well kill Jerry now. She vehemently protested the marriage, but Jerry kept assuring her that their matrimonial alliance was perfectly acceptable and okay. He urged that their marriage was love-born, and when two people love each other, the stark differences between them fade away in the background. When Myra brought up her parents' impending anger, Jerry didn't seem to care about her concerns. The teenager told him, "Are you crazy? My daddy will kill you." He replied, "No, he won't. Your mama and daddy won't mind." I'm thinking, oh yes, they will. For the entirety of their time, Myra kept thinking that Jerry had gone insane. At any moment, he would erupt into laughter because their conversation was nothing but an elaborate prank. But the laughter never came. Years later, Myra described the experience as riding the tail end of a roller coaster. After all, she didn't exactly understand the prospect of her marriage. In her imagination, marriage was just a scene of a guy getting on his knee, putting a ring on her finger, and then she would say, "Yes, I do," in front of a preacher, who gets up from the dinner table and gets married. But in the spur of a moment, the duo was married, just like that. Now there isn't any pictorial proof of the couple getting married. But according to Myra, Winona Ryder, who played her in the highly controversial movie, captured her deer caught in the headlights moment perfectly. Great Balls of Fire came out in 1989 and was based on the autobiographical account Myra had penned down 7 years earlier. But of course, nothing comes close to Myra herself retelling the start of her turbulent marriage. The singer and her husband didn't explicitly tell her to keep their marriage hidden from Lois and Jay. But Myra had understood the gravity of the situation herself. She was genuinely concerned that her dad would kill her husband, and while the marriage itself was confusing, she didn't want Jerry to die. After their night out, they returned home, and Myra went to school the next day. For 5 to 6 days, she was successfully able to keep her marriage a secret from her parents. But then the secret became too much for her. She considered telling her friends that she had married a man 9 years older than her. But who would have understood her predicament? Everyone around her seemed to love Jerry anyway. Myra recalled that she didn't dare to say the aloud either. So she left the marriage license in her room for her mother to find out. Before leaving for school, she placed the sinister piece of paper in her room and saw Jerry leaving for Sun Studios. She didn't bother to share her plan with her husband, who would have definitely forbidden her from exposing him to her parents. What happened next won't surprise you. The aftermath of the marriage, when Lois found the marriage license in her young daughter's room, she was enraged. But no one came close to the anger felt by Jay, who was betrayed by his own blood. He had given Jerry a career and a home, and he didn't expect his cousin to exploit the innocence of his daughter. He instantly grabbed his pistol and made his way to the recording studio. Myra and her mother were convinced that he was going to kill Jerry, so Lois frantically called Phillips in the studio and informed him that an enraged Jay was on his way to kill one of his best musical talents. Apparently, he didn't seem too concerned about the fact that Jerry had eloped with Myra. The music mogul didn't miss a beat. He informed her that he would handle the situation, and, well, he truly did. Before Jay could even reach the studio,